Good evening. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for making time for us. Do you think that the African CDC is being too hopeful or too optimistic?
Adrian, and good evening to the listeners. I think they are setting a target that is too far, and they are not setting themselves milestones. Because remember that all of those leaders by 2040, all of them will have been out of office, and therefore they will not be there to account for the target that has been set. I would have preferred a scenario where we have milestones that are in chunks of 5 years, and every year we must commit to do something in order to achieve the objectives that we set for ourselves as a country. I think 2040 is too far. Some people may think that is optimistic given our track record of setting objectives as a country, as a continent. But I'm of the view that with COVID having woken us up to the need to have our own biotech and pharmaceutical industry, we should be running with much greater speed and also setting ourselves much tighter targets.
But wasn't that what HIV/AIDS was supposed to have done as well? And how the continent responded to HIV/AIDS? Some people would have thought that that would have spurred the continent on to start building the necessary pharmaceutical capacity.
Indeed, and there has been talks of creating a state pharmaceutical company. It hasn't gone far, but I think the HIV was the first hit, and Corona is the second hit. And Corona was the kind of a crisis that was at a global scale, in that it actually disrupted countries. It also disrupted our access to pharmaceutical products. Because countries like India, which are the suppliers of South Africa's, the majority of South Africa's pharmaceutical needs, they shut down the export of pharmaceuticals during their hard lockdowns. So the risk of the impact of COVID was much greater than the impact of HIV, in that it shut down economies, it shut down countries, it shut down supply chains, and threatened a whole lot more than just those who are infected by the virus.
Considering that the continent already has the research capacity, and some of that research capacity being here in South Africa as well, and contributing to the knowledge base of, for instance, diseases and viruses such as COVID-19. So the research capacity that is at least something that is being dealt with. But then when it comes to the manufacturing, what would you say are some of the hurdles that are standing in the way of having that manufacturing capacity? And I saw a report indicating that we only have about 5 countries on the continent that has such capacity. But even then, that capacity in some cases is only limited to labeling as well as filling.
If you consider the history of South Africa, that when the African National took over, there were 3 vaccine manufacturing companies, state-owned, that were shut down. So there has been capacity to manufacture vaccines for various diseases, and there were political decisions to shut them down. I think even now, all we need is a political will, because as we've just mentioned, the research capacity is there. We have some of the top scientists in the world. We have top institutions like UCT, VETS, CSIR, Northwest University. They do have research capability, and they have world-beating scientists that can actually support manufacturing. In fact, what we have found as a group is that universities are producing a lot of scientific IP, but there isn't any of the state and the private sector support in order to commercialize what universities are actually producing. So we do need to get to a point where the state provides a lead and the private sector as well participate in ensuring that it invests in the IP that is being generated by universities and other research institutions.
Yeah. Why is that that reluctance? That reluctance from whether it is from the state or whether it is from the private sector?
I think the part about the private sector is that we have a dislocation of capital, in that the decision about money are made by the financial services industry. But if you look at the well-known CEOs in South Africa, are CEOs of banks. We don't know CEOs of manufacturing companies, because manufacturing is not seen as a critical part of the economy. It is not a sexy part of the economy. It's not where the greatest of bonuses have been paid. It is not where the most engineers. In fact, the sad part is that the most South African engineers are found within the financial industry and within the banks. So we do need a deliberate industrial program that will ensure that the manufacturing becomes a sector of the economy that is attractive. The state must provide incentives, and and these incentives must be easy to access. They must not be obscure. I mean, there are some incentives, but you don't have a central repository of incentives that exist for various innovations. And I think we sit with IP. We lack entrepreneurs. We lack state support for entrepreneurs. You look at the South African capital market in relation to the American capital market. That in the US, entrepreneurs are supported greatly, and the market is able to absorb early losses. In South Africa, we don't have a bold capital market that will fund entrepreneurs and ensure that they take them from startup to a point where enterprises are actually successful.
Does that not speak to what we've seen now, even during COVID-19, where you see that the banks, they say that the regulations that the banks have in place are too prohibitive, but then the state itself, even with its funding development institutions, then takes a posture that is quite similar in that it becomes prohibitive. Or some people would say that it's almost like the government is not funding innovation, it's not making money available for that innovation.
Indeed, and I think that's a function of the concentration of the market. That we have 4 big banks, and all of these banks make billions of rands in profits. In fact, the most profit in this country is made more in financial services than in manufacturing, right? And what's happening here is that because the banks don't have to compete for to fund, they are oversubscribed, right? And which then makes them to become very choosy. That they are much more reluctant to fund the newcomers, and the old players are also too comfortable to disrupt themselves, because what you lack in this country is a pipeline of new entrants that are coming to the market, disrupting supply chains, disrupting product markets. We don't have that because the banks don't have to. They make money despite themselves. They make money despite supporting in spite of not supporting the economy. And that kind of a scenario calls for a review of the South African economy and ensuring that the banks have competition. I should be in a position where if I'm not funded by Bank 1, I should be funded by Bank 10 or Bank 20. But in South Africa, you know that we have 4 major banks, and if either one of them does not fund you, the likelihood of the other 3 funding you is actually limited, because they tend to use the same systems, because they have no incentive to compete, because there is enough market for all of them to coexist peacefully. So we have far too much of a peace in the banking industry, and far too much of a cooperation and copying of each other's strategy.
So you find that the banks are risk averse, but the state also then takes up the same posture. And I see their report indicating that you'd need at least 200 million euros just to set up a facility to manufacture vaccines. But just in conclusion, quickly, we've seen like some countries on the continent at least starting with the development of their own vaccines, including Nigeria. And for me, that brings another question to the fore, in that how do you then bring the populace to have confidence in locally manufactured medicine, including what's currently being done in Nigeria? Because when I tweeted that, some people were saying like, oh no, Nigeria can keep their drugs.
Look, I mean, the regulation of medicines is such that there are regulatory bodies that actually test the efficacy, or rather that evaluate the data for the efficacy and safety of drugs. So I think SAPRA, which regulate Medicines South Africa is a highly reputable regulator, trusted internationally. So for us as a country, we look to what SABRA says. But just on the issue of Nigeria developing its own vaccine, we are working on 3 vaccines in South Africa, and I'm sure there are other organizations that are working on the vaccines. What we don't have, again, is a call by the state to say, whoever is working on a vaccine must come forward and make that access very easy in order to register the work that's been done and share ideas and see if there's any way that the state can help expedite the work that we're doing.
Khandani, really appreciate your time. That is Khandani Msibi, who is the CEO of 360 Global Solutions.